Hey, I'm Zach.
And I'm Jesse.
And you're watching In Depth.
Oh, now you know.
All right, so Elon spoke at the 68th International Astronautical Congress down in Adelaide, Australia the other day. And we thought we'd give you kind of a synopsis of what he talked about. You really should go watch the video in its full amazingness.
It's only about 45 minutes. It's worth every second.
This was a talk on 50 ways to get to Mars. And Elon was one of the speakers, probably the most anticipated speaker.
Definitely.
Elon, as we know, wants us to become a multi-planet species. Quickly, why is that?
Well, he wants us to believe in the future. He wants us to be excited by the future, to wake up every morning and to be excited about what's going to happen in the days and weeks and years to come.
And if we don't somehow get off this planet at some point, we could all die as a species because this planet could get hit by an asteroid or something.
Right.
It will get hit by an asteroid.
Yeah, the once you look at larger and larger timescales, obviously the chances of something catastrophic happening to Earth that could wipe out all of humanity is quite high.
He's talking about the BFR. This is his new rocket, and what does it stand for?
BFR stands for Big Rocket.
He's figured out how to pay for this. The last time he spoke to the conference, he was saying he's not quite sure how he'd afford it. Now he's figured it out. So he's basically found out that he's going to make their current vehicles, which is the Falcon 9, the Falcon 9 Heavy, the Dragon, obsolete or redundant, because this is going to replace them. BFR is going to replace them.
Right. And he's basically doing this because he wants to stop spending so much resources developing both the Dragon and the Falcon Heavy.
Right. The BFR basically takes over. It's an all-in-one, and we're going to explain what that is. So first of all, to make the BFR happen, he needed to figure out how to do what's called a deep cryo liquid oxygen tank. Look at this thing. It is ginormous. It holds 1,200 tons of liquid oxygen. Now, why did he need to invent this tank?
So there's a couple things. So usually whenever you're going into space, one interesting thing about space is that there's no oxygen. That's a given. That's pretty well known, I would hope. But that means that you can't light anything on fire in space, because fire is just, you're adding oxygen to something and it binds and releases a lot of energy. So you have to bring your own oxygen. Now, normally you'd bring it as liquid oxygen, and you'd also have to bring a propellant.
Okay.
And the bigger you make these things, the harder and harder it is to store them, because you're running into a lot more pressure.
Gotcha.
Higher material property needs.
So he made this tank out of carbon fiber, and in fact, to test it, they actually blew it up. Look at this.
So they actually pushed it to its breaking point, and it exploded above its engineering design, which is what you want. So that shows that it is a functional piece. Not only are they going to bring liquid oxygen, they're also going to be bringing liquid cryo methane.
Okay.
So methane is going to be the propellant used.
Cool. And those are both plentiful and cheap here on Earth. This BFR is going to use Raptor engines, which will provide the highest thrust per energy rating of any rocket. And then also, he has to use perfected propulsive landings. And he's been practicing that now with the Falcon 9. They've had 16 successful landings in a row, which shows that they understand how to do that.
Right, and so they want to eventually get on par with the safest commercial airliners.
And I mean, I'm sure that seemed crazy when airplanes first were invented.
Absolutely.
And it probably seems crazy now with rockets, but it shouldn't.
Right.
Also, he's saying that you won't need legs for the next landings. He'll actually be able to land on the launch mounts. Now, why is that important?
So if you land with legs, I mean, that's perfectly a fine way to land. But if you land right back where you took off from, all of the infrastructure that you need is right there. So instead of having to land and then, cart this giant 10-story building-sized rocket over back to the launch pad to take it off, a landing pad and launch pad, if you can land it right back where it had taken off from, you just basically attach all the things again, fuel it back up, and then take it off again.
Just like a plane.
Just like a plane.
Right?
Actually, even simpler than a plane. Plane needs a runway, taxiways, it needs to cart itself around. The rocket basically just falls straight out of the sky. It's like a helicopter.
Gotcha.
Basically.
Now, the launch rate has been increasing exponentially for SpaceX. So, as we can see here, they have been launching rockets since, for the past 8 years or whatever.
Yep.
And now they're getting into the point where they're going to be launching, get this, there are 60 orbital launches roughly every year from Earth. And that's all the companies launching all the satellites around the Earth.
Right.
Next year, 2018, SpaceX is going to launch about half of all of Earth's orbital launches. That is incredible from a company that just started a few years ago.
Right.
Now, Elon was saying that when we launch for Mars, we're going to need many launches per day to support that.
Right.
So that's why we need to get this number up. Now, SpaceX has also automated the rendezvous and the docking of the space station with the Dragon 2 automated capsule. So basically, Dragon 2 is now going to be able to very soon mount to the ISS completely without a human pilot.
Right. So right now the Dragon 1 flies up to around the space station, and then the Canada arm comes out and grabs it and brings it on and connects it.
And is that done with a human?
Yes, and you have a human controlling the Canada arm, but with the Dragon 2, it'll fly up and it'll just boop dock.
That is so cool.
Yeah.
Elon mentioned how they are perfecting the heat shield technology on the Dragon, and this is important because they're going to need that technology to work on the BFR.
Right.
Now, Elon said that when he started SpaceX, he called himself the chief engineer, and that was because no one else would go to work for them. He looked around all the other rocket companies, and no one would come work for them.
Right. Everyone was saying like, oh, I want to work for NASA. I don't want to work for this little tiny company. Yeah, startup rocket company. What are you, crazy?
And he admitted that the first 3 launches of SpaceX were messed up, and he actually he took the blame for it. He said, I messed up the first 3 launches. Now, I would never put it that way, but he owns it.
Yeah.
And he said that the 4th launch was super critical because it was that 4th launch that if they hadn't gotten it right, SpaceX probably would not now exist as a company.
Yeah.
And that happened 9 years ago. Now he said they're at 70 to 80% reusability with the Falcon 9.
Wow.
And now they are beginning serious development of the BFR. He said it's already underway. They've bought the machinery to start building it. This is exciting. So let's talk about what the BFR is.
Yeah.
It has a payload of 150 tons. Now, what does that compare to?
So this is compared to, let's say, the Falcon Heavy, which
Okay.
isn't even made yet. They haven't even made it. The Falcon Heavy should have a payload capacity of 30 tons.
Wow, so 150 tons compared to 30 tons, and that's the Falcon Heavy, not the Falcon 9.
Right. This is the Falcon 9 with 2 extra first stages, just bolted onto the side of it.
Wow.
And just take a look at this rocket. It is huge.
Yes.
It is on par with the Saturn V, which was the largest thing ever launched.
Now, the BFR is a full reuse rocket. What does that mean?
That means that every single part of it that flies up into the sky and into space can at some point turn around and land back down onto a launch pad.
And then be relaunched again once you refuel it.
Relaunched after it just needs fuel, basically.
Now, it's a 2-stage rocket. It uses 31 Raptor engines for 5,400 tons of liftoff thrust.
Right.
It's a 4,400 ton vehicle mass.
And so that is the first stage.
Right.
So basically, you only really need the first stage to get out of Earth's gravitational well and also atmosphere. So that's to get it up into orbit.
Okay. And now it can land anywhere in the solar system, and that is because they added these 2 delta wings. Now, why did they add those delta wings?
So the delta wings are there to add control if you're going into an atmospheric landing condition.
So a dense atmosphere.
A dense or less than dense atmosphere. Basically, instead of, once you encounter atmosphere and you're traveling very fast, things that stick out on the aircraft would start to, you could run into trouble. So you need to have control. So those 2 delta wings, all simplified down to 2 split controllers. So they're sort of like this. Instead of just a flap that goes up and down, it can open and close. So that way, if I'm the rocket and I'm hurtling towards the ground, I can open up this side, which would increase slow this side down of the aircraft, so it would make it turn left instead of needing a rudder that would do the same thing.
Now, the cabin of this, as we said, is ginormous. It is 825 cubic meters. That is greater than an A380 Airbus jetliner.
Yeah.
So what he's envisioning is 40 cabins that'll hold people, and they can hold anywhere from 2 to 6 people per cabin, depending on how long the flight is. If it's a long flight to Mars, then you probably just put 2 people in each cabin. And if it's a shorter flight, which we'll get to in a minute, then you could fit up to 6 people.
Right. So, going to Mars, that means 80 people per ship.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
That's
awesome.
crazy. Now, it's got the methane and the oxygen tanks like we talked about. And on the top part of the rocket, what do we call that part?
So I'm going to, for ease, I'm going to call it the capsule.
Okay. So
usually it's capsule.
On the capsule, there are 4 Raptor vacuum engines, and those have gimbals.
Right.
And there's 2 center landing engines, which are smaller. And tell me why you need the center landing engines as opposed to the 4. Why can't you just use the 4 Raptor engines?
So the 4 Raptor engines that have a much larger cone, those are for use in a vacuum. Basically, when you release fuel out into space, it goes phew! It rarefies rather quickly, as opposed to
And
if
it
you...
says that too? It says phew!
Well, you can't hear it over the roar of the engine, but it could sound like that. Yeah, you release the fuel and it rarefies in space, and so it's a much more efficient cone to have a large cone.
Gotcha.
But now when you come down into a dense atmosphere like Earth's or even Mars, it's more efficient to have a smaller cone.
Okay. Now there's 2 of these, and why is that significant? Why 2 landing rockets?
So this is mainly for redundancy. One engine can land the rocket.
Oh, so if one fails, you've got a second backup.
If one fails, you have a backup rocket, which is nice.
2 of these ships can mate up in space, rear to rear, as we see here. And what is it doing?
Basically, you're going to have one rocket that has a lot of fuel and another one that doesn't have a lot of fuel. And all you have to do is, so they're connected like this, and here's the fuel. You simply move the rockets this way, and the fuel stays in the same place and goes to the other rocket.
I didn't get that.
There's no pumps or anything.
That's so cool. So that's how you can refuel in space.
Yeah.
Wow, I love this.
Yeah.
The BFR has more payload than the Saturn V. But get this. So here's a chart showing all the different rockets throughout time and the size of their payloads. Now reverse that to get the cost of launching the BFR. The BFR actually costs the least of any rocket up until now, even though it has the largest payload.
Right. So it's he said basically that, the cost is reversed. And the reason for this is the Saturn V was used once. You'd launch it and then it would burn up in the atmosphere.
Here's a quote from Elon. Crazy, mad that we build these sophisticated rockets and then crash them every time.
Right. And so the Saturn V burned up in the atmosphere. So no matter what the cost of that rocket is, you're basically losing it every single time.
Wow.
Whereas the BFR is the cheapest. It's also the largest, but that's because it's basically fully reusable.
Right. It's like an airliner.
Right. And so one caveat to that is the ablative heat shielding. Basically, that is like
it does wear out.
That'll wear out like a brake pad, basically,
Right.
is what is the analogy that Elon used.
So he said that reusability is absolutely fundamental. The cost of methane and oxygen is really low, so therefore there's a value in refilling the rocket. Customers can go and use their old stock of Falcon 9s and Falcon Heavies. So why is he going to keep building Falcon 9s and Falcon Heavies if the BFR can replace them?
He realizes that for a lot of space applications like satellites and stuff like that, you want the sure thing. So the Falcon 9 has been sort of proved as a very reliable rocket. If you were thinking of sending a satellite into space, you'd say, I'll take the sure thing. I'll take the Falcon before I go for this BFR thing until it gets proven. So he's going to keep these, and these are basically going to be his moneymakers while he builds the BFR.
Now get this, the BFR is going to have a 9-meter diameter payload. So that means that instead of launching satellites that up until now had to be really tiny and then kind of like unfold, you can launch multiple satellites in the payload bay.
Right. This is really cool. Basically, we've been so limited in our satellite design, especially for satellites that orbit the Earth. The Hubble, for instance, was a fairly large satellite, and with the BFR we could launch like a much bigger one.
Yeah, so we could have huge satellite telescopes that could gather way more light and let us see farther into the universe.
Yeah,
this is exciting stuff.
It's exciting not just for the travel aspect, but also for the scientific and just world living benefits.
Now, Elon was talking about that the payload bay could also collect old satellites and space debris, which is amazing.
Yeah, I think this is a little interesting. I'm not sure how it works because, you can't just sort of nom down on a satellite and then land it.
Also, the BFR can be used to service the International Space Station.
Yeah.
And here's a picture of it docked to the space station.
It's basically
it
the size of the space station.
But that's going to allow us to build out the space station even faster, which
It's
is
true.
so cool.
Or just hear me out on this, more space stations.
Yes.
We've gone for so long with only one space. There are technically a couple other ones. There's the Chinese one that orbits the Earth the other way. There was a couple Russian ones, but now they've sort of joined in with the ISS and let the Mir and everything burn up. But yeah, we need to seriously think about getting some more fun space stations up in the atmosphere.
Maybe a space hotel.
That would be a huge moneymaker, in my opinion.
The BFR can also be used for lunar surface missions with no refill on the moon. What does that mean?
Basically, it means it can go to the moon and then come back from the moon. You don't have to refill it.
And that means that you can have lunar base Alpha. Elon said, it's 2017, we should have a lunar base by now. What the hell is going on?
That's exactly what I've been thinking my entire life. Why don't we have a moon base? I remember, and this is an old thing, Newt Gingrich, one of the presidential candidates, was like, I want a moon base. And for a second, I was like, maybe.
Yes, this is going to be so exciting. Now, let's talk about Mars. Being a multi-planet species beats the hell out of being a single-planet species. That is a quote from Elon. You can retank in orbit, like we just talked about. He said that we will need local propellant production. So what does that mean, local propellant production?
That means basically we have all the ingredients that we need to make the methane. And this is another reason why we're using methane, by the way.
Oh, okay, because
you're used to hearing about rockets full of like kerosene and other like really volatile stuff.
Yeah, so what do you have on Mars that can make methane?
Right. There's no, like, we can't go drilling for oil on Mars. All we need is the CO2, which is the atmosphere of Mars.
You need water.
You need water, which is in the soil of Mars.
Okay.
So
and what else?
That's, well, you need some power. So solar power.
Oh, solar power. Okay.
So solar panels, grab some of that air, grab some of that soil, grab the water out of it. Bada bing, bada boom.
All right, so
and you got
so
some
here's
methane.
his plan. Here we go. You ready to get your mind blown? I mean, if your mind wasn't already blown by now, pick it off the floor. Here we go. Mars to Earth with just a single ship. So basically, the BFR can make it back from Mars just like it can make it back from the moon with just the single BFR.
Right.
So in 2022, which is when Mars and Earth are going to be nice and close together, he's going to launch a cargo mission to Mars. So unmanned, 2 BFRs are going to Mars. They're going to land, and they're going to start construction of the stuff that will be needed for the next stage. Then in 2024, which is every 2 years or so we get close enough to Mars, so 2024 we release 4 BFRs, 2 of them unmanned, 2 of them manned.
2024.
We are going to Mars, people.
Yes. I mean, he said that this is a little bit ambitious, but honestly, it beats the heck out of what anyone else is talking about. NASA said they were going to, launch unmanned in 2030.
So he said that he's starting construction in Q2 of 2018 of the first BFR ship, and that will be complete and ready for launch in 5 years. Now, when we get there, we'll need to confirm the water and place the power, the mining, and the life support infrastructure for future flights, and then we're good to go.
Yeah.
So check this out. This is a picture of the Mars base.
Yep.
And then
you can
the
start
city,
to build the city.
And then you can start terraforming Mars. What does terraforming mean?
Terraforming means literally changing the atmospheric makeup of the planet to better suit human life.
I want to stop right here for a second. I know that a lot of media has picked up on this, and you're starting to hear stories on the mainstream media, and they're usually cover it like this. This is what Elon said, but he's a crazy billionaire, and this isn't going to happen anytime soon. I want to point out that, first of all, they've been saying this about Elon all along, with whether it's his cars, whether it's his, drilling tunnels, whether it's relanding rockets.
Right.
And when they started talking about relanding rockets a few years ago, they couched it the same way. They said, well, this would be nice, but it's never been done. It's probably not going to be done for a long time.
Right.
It's being done now.
Right. He's landed 16 rockets successfully in a row.
And this was the major piece of the puzzle that had to be solved in order to move on to the next step, and he's done it.
Right. You can't make BFRs and throw them away into the ocean like you do with the Saturn V. They have to land. And being able to do this for both the first stage and the crew capsule is fantastic.
Now, another way that he can pay for this, check this out. So Elon released this video here, which shows a BFR. It's at a port where people are entering it out in the middle of a bay, and then it takes off. And where's it headed, Jesse?
To the other side of the world.
How long is it going to take to get to the other side of the world?
About somewhere between 30 to 45 minutes. So you can go literally from like New York to Australia in like 45 minutes.
Mind blown. Now, after he released this video the next day on Instagram, he released, fly to most places on Earth in under 30 minutes and anywhere in under 60. Cost per seat should be about the same as full fare economy in an aircraft. Forgot to mention that.
Oh, he forgot to mention that it would cost the same as getting on an airplane.
Now, I know a lot of people are already saying, it's a rocket, how could it cost the same? But let's think about this, people. The rocket is basically a airplane.
Right. I mean, an airplane is a sealed box that you get into that flies in the sky.
And you reuse it.
Now, the plane relies on lift and constant thrust. The engines are on the entire time. If the engines turn off, you're landing very soon.
With the BFR, you use a lot of thrust to get up out of our atmosphere, but then you're traveling at 27,000 kilometers an hour.
And you don't even need the engine on.
Right. And then about in a few minutes later, you're across the world and you land, which uses some energy. And then, boom, you're on the other side of the world.
This is and basically the fuel should be similar. The fuel usage in terms of cost should be similar. I mean, think about it this way. It's just a ballistic flight. It's like you got launched out of a cannon. You're just floating in 0G around the planet until it's like, oh, please come back to your seat. It'd be for like 10 minutes. It'd be like, please return to your seat because we will begin the landing process.
The thought is that you would charge hundreds of thousands of dollars to rich people now to do a suborbital flight.
Right.
And so this would be for the cost of a regular airfare. And let's keep this in mind. Weather doesn't really affect these flights because you could fly over a hurricane, for instance, because you'd be outside of the atmosphere.
Right. Usually if there's some kind of weather thing in the middle of the country, it throws off all the airplane traffic. It now, as long as, where you're going to and where you're taking off from is going to be clear in the next, 30, 45 minutes, you're good to go.
I mean, what Elon is talking about up until now has been the realm of science fiction. People have talked about great ideas like this in the past, and it was always like, oh, that's a great story. But now what he's talking about is science reality. Why do we know this is reality? Because he's doing it right now. All of his companies are making the things happen that we're told couldn't happen.
Yeah.
And they're happening. So go watch this video. It is amazing. It will blow your mind. If it doesn't, there's something wrong with you. And please tell us below if you think that we've lost our mind.
All right. Thank you so much for watching. Please consider supporting us on Patreon. You will get a bonus Patreon story at the end of Tesla Time News every week, which you can find on patreon.com. You can support us with $1 or more a month.
Yeah, good value there.
It's pretty good value.
Almost as good a value as flying to the other side of the world in 30 minutes.
That's true. We also have some other Patreon perks, so definitely go check them out. All right. Thank you so much for watching. Now you know.
Now you know.